Now, having created these markup schemas, we then having invented this markup, we then went backwards, and from that markup, which was all it was well-formed XML, we derived a schema from it, with the idea that not only do you have the document instance in XML, you have a schema in XML and a style sheet in XML as well. So perhaps we could look at the actual schema as a text in and of itself. And when we created the XML schema for Crow Tyrannosaurus, we got this shape. I would love to be able to think that this is a crow. To echo the crow that is the subject of the poem. I think it has more to do with the fact that I'm obsessively hierarchical and I like keeping my elements nested and local, which means that you go deep, 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 deep into the hierarchies. Another way of you could design this in a completely different way, which would be much more shallow hierarchically, and you wouldn't get the same visual effect. Nonetheless, I find the visual effect intriguing. This isn't going to work, is it? Particularly since when I generated the schema for the second poem, we had very much the same thing. As I say, I'd like to say that it was some mystical response to the poem. I suspect it's just the fact that when anything I code ends up looking like a bird's eye view of a bird flying west. But I found that interesting. I found it interesting particularly because if you render the schema in visual form, it has a remarkable similarity to visual poetry that is frequently used. Frequently used today and has been used throughout the time. What you see on the right-hand side is George Herbert's poem Easter Wings, which seeks to replicate the visual effect of a bird as well as the semantic effect. When we generated the style sheet, I bumped up against the realization that my extensible style sheet talents need a lot of work, but I did manage to get Crow Tyrannosaurus into some kind of shape that looks like the original published poem. I wrote a Python program to retrieve the various values of the attributes, hoping that that might show me something. If it does, I'm darned if I know what it is. There are the values of the various attributes. I suppose that you'd be able to find something more if you went into it further, but I haven't been able to find anything of any great interest there. What I did find interesting, though, was that in my effort to make this grid come out the way it's supposed to visually, my ineptitude with XSLT, and particularly my ineptitude with white space, which is my avenging fury. When I'm dead and gone, white space demons will pursue me into the farther regions. I can never get my head around white space. The only way I could do it was by taking the sculptor's view and pretending that this was something that was carved out of stone and to recreate the surrounding stone. If we treat this not as one statement, but as a single statement repeated 4 times, you get something like this. And it turned out the only way I could get that visual effect was to create 4 statements and put the words I didn't want in white font so that it didn't show up. Inept, perhaps. However, even inept things sometimes show interesting possibilities. Now, the question that we should be thinking about here is, under what circumstances could this engender the phenomenon of complexity within the use of electronic literary texts? This was a fun exercise for the two of us to do, and we had a rollicking good time with it. However, we do have to ask ourselves, is there any way that this kind of activity could in fact create the kind of interpretive activity which might create a complex system at the level of textual response, if not of textual creation? What could this markup do? Well, I would argue that it does in fact foster the expression and interchange of responses based on poetic structure. The markup that I created has no pretensions to being authoritative, but it does have pretensions to being an honest response to the poem at a particular time that it was read. And it is possible that by producing machine-readable expressions of a response, those responses could be aggregated together and shared in some kind of a creative way. I would argue, too, that it provides a freedom to express idiosyncratic personal responses, some of which may resonate with other responses. So that if you had a response which you refrained from speaking in your poetry class because you knew darn well that no one else would confess to having that response, it might be possible to find that your idiosyncratic response does in fact echo another idiosyncratic response somewhere else, which, even if it doesn't translate into a valid reading of the poem in the conventional sense, might provide some clues to the ways in which the poem is going down in particular circumstances and with particular users. Would argue that it also provides the means to interact with the poem beneath the surface of description and annotation. At the moment, our tools for tagging texts are very much at the level of sticky notes that are attached to the text, or tags which are basically short phrase descriptions. This provides a means of interacting with the text which actually goes down below the surface and enables people to identify structural features that are meaningful to them and relations between structural features that are meaningful to them.